アマンダさん、素晴らしいプレゼンをありがとうございました。皆さんの質疑を受ける前にちょっとだけ僕の方からコメントをさせていただければなと思います。会場の皆さんにもお聞きしたいんですけども、この日本の衆議院選挙の投票率とアメリカの大統領選挙の投票率ってどっちが高いかって、ご存知ですかね。アメリカ大統領選挙の投票率の方が高いよと思う人、手を挙げてもらっていいですか。逆にじゃあ日本の衆議院議員選挙の投票率の方が高いよと思う人、手を挙げていただいていいですか。ですね、今後から挙げてくれた勇敢な皆さんが正解です。実は結構な人が驚きかと思うんですけども、あれだけ盛り上がってるように見えるアメリカの大統領選挙でも大体の投票率が 60% ぐらいです。で、あれだけ盛り上がってないっていうとちょっと失礼になるかもしれないんですが、あまり投票に行ってないように見える日本の衆議院議員選挙の投票率でもこの前初めて 60% 切りましたが、基本的には 65% から 70% ぐらいの高い投票率を誇っています。そこでアマンダさんに何個かお聞きをしたいんですけども、これだけアメリカで選挙が盛り上がっているように少なくとも日本からは見えるんですけど、なぜそこの投票率が実は日本より低いのかっていう答えをお持ちでしょうか。
Yeah. So I agree that you would tend to think that because the campaigns are so enthusiastic that they would translate into more young people voting. But the problem is that even though they're enthusiastic, they're really only enthusiastic for the older generations. Young people don't necessarily identify, well, our process gets very ugly, very nasty. It's, too long, honestly, because it just gives people too much time to dig into the other person's background, and they talk about things that are completely outside of the scope of the political system. And those are the very things that turn young people off. Young people are, we deal with the issue of young people thinking that their politicians are not like them, and they think that they can't trust their politicians. And when you have a campaign process that might be engaging, but it's also pretty ugly, and it's highly covered by the media, but that's on TV. And I think you guys probably know, do you watch TV? You probably watch your TV online. You watch, we watch Netflix or Hulu, and it's really rare that we would ever see one of the commercials that a campaign spent millions of dollars to air, because it's just not in a place that we would ever run into it as a young person. And I say we a lot because I'm 27 and still put myself in this category. But I do, yeah, so I think that even though it's just not a traditional way for the campaigns to talk to people, and because of that, it's a great barrier to young people actually participating, and it actually turns young people off for us.
なるほどなるほど。結構意外な部分なんですけども、日本っていうのは投票期間が選挙期間2週間とかすごく短いので、もっと長くやれば投票に行くんだろうと思う人が多いと思うんですけど、アメリカの場合は長くやりすぎてて、なんかもう若者としては嫌気がさしてるというのは結構驚きだったので、あともう一つ先ほど出されてたグラフで、日本の若者としては若い人が社会を変えられると思ってる人たちが 6% っていうのはすごく悔しいところなんですけども、なぜじゃあその日本だけはこれだけ低くてっていうのはいろんな理由があると思います。で、アマンダさんもグラフを見られた後に日本に来られて、で今日まで5日間いろんな各地で若い人と交流をしてきたと思うんですけども、実際日本の若者と交流をされてどのような感想を得ましたか。
I'm really impressed because I think that young people everywhere, actually, I think it's an interesting time for young people everywhere, where we are coming of age in a time where we do really believe that we are these change agents, And so I've had several, I'm surprised by the 6.5 statistic because that's not what I've encountered at all. And I wonder if it's just a function of it like showing up in a poll. It makes it harder, you know, it's always, who knows what polls, if they're actually, what the truth is to them. And I think that's actually one of the exciting things about the tour that I've been on, because I've had so many amazing conversations with young people throughout the country that really do want to engage. And it's no different in America, where like you really do just have to make that initial ask, and you have to go up to them and start the conversation. And by doing so, they really do surprise everyone, and they are engaged in that way. So I am also surprised by the 6.5 statistic, but like any statistic like that, when you actually are on the ground and talking to people, it seems to be a lot different. And then in terms, I'm actually really jealous of the 2-week-long process, because in America, you know, campaigns, they last for a year and a half sometimes. And if you think about the time and energy and really the money that goes into that, it's, you know, frightening. And young people in particular, like, we don't care about the election until it's election time. And so when we do the registration work, we talk about registration every single day. And you know, this past year we registered 1.1 million new people. 800,000 of those people registered in the last 2 weeks. So you just see how young people, like, it doesn't matter to them until it's actually relevant, and that comes when it's closer to the election. So I actually think that our system would fare a lot better if it was cut down, because young people tend to shy away from it because they think it's too long, they think there's too much money in it, and they think that it gets really ugly. And if we could prevent that, I think we would see different results.
なるほどなるほど。確かにああいう数字は僕自身が見ても日本人の僕が見ても6% のびっくりですね。多分アメリカの人が見たら余計びっくりしてるんだろうなと思うんですが、ただ今ツイッターでもいろいろコメントを集めている中でそれに関連するコメントがあって、自分が投票しても結局投票結果なんて変わんないよってあるとか、政治がそれで変わると思えないっていうのは、結構来てますね、そのようなのが。でそこで一つ日本とアメリカの違いをもう一つですね挙げるとすると、先ほどアマンダさんはアメリカはミレニアル世代18から29歳ぐらいの方ですかの数がどんどん増えていっていると、全人口の中で。なので若い人が力を実感して投票に行くんだっていうような話があったし、その若い人の力をもっと引き出さなければいけないっていう話があって、で皆さんご存知の日本っていうのは全く逆で、若い人の数がどんどん減っていって、でいつの間にか高齢者寄りの政治っていうのか、あれ僕たちの未来どうなのかみたいな状況があると。で僕自身はそういう状況だからこそ、若い人が今こそ投票に行かなきゃいけないと。効果があるかどうかなんかわからないけども、そんなんじゃなくまず行くことが大事だと思ってます。でそこでアマンダさんに、僕からの最後の質問なんですけども、日本の若い人っておそらく真面目なんでしょうね。効果がないと思ってやりたくないっていう、その数字で見て言っても意味ないなと思ってやらないっていうところがあるので、そのような日本の若者に対してあなたの一票、あなたが投票に来いっていうのがどれだけあなた自身にとって大切で、日本自身にとって大切だっていうのかについてもう一回皆さんにぶつけていただければなと思うんですけど、どうでしょう？
Yeah. So to address the first question, where people think that their vote doesn't actually matter, that I think comes in. The way to change that is to actually kind of revolutionize and change the culture around voting. And I think that starts at a very early age. So that's, you know, talking to 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds about how important their vote actually is and how important they are to the process. I think that, you know, my ultimate vision would be that every child, they look forward to turning 20 to drive. How old? 18? 20 to drive, 18 to drive, and they look forward to turning 20 to drink. Yes, no. And then, but like, why can't they look forward to turning 20 to vote too? And I think you have to start the conversation earlier. And obviously you can have these arguments. I think that when you're talking to your friends and you're trying to convince them that voting is cool, you can use a lot of different strategies. One unfortunate strategy that we can use is to actually leverage the low turnout numbers. So if you don't think your vote actually matters, like think about, you know, if there are fewer people participating, then that makes your vote even more powerful, one. And then I'm sure that we can cite elections where 1 vote or 2 votes were actually the deciding factor. In America, we have several of those elections at the local level where it was literally like, I think even last November, there was a story of a politician who lost by 1 vote and he didn't go vote. And so that's, you know, like the power of 1 vote. And then in terms of like not feeling like, or in the terms of the actual numbers, so yes, we have a surging demographic of this millennial generation that will kind of overwhelm the entire population of our country. And the numbers might not be the same here, but we young people are still the future. So, if you don't invest, well, if we all subscribe to the belief that, you know, a democracy is healthy and something that we should aspire to and that we believe in and that we value, then not investing our young people in that democracy is a missed opportunity. Because what happens in 50 years if you don't have young people engaged in the system and the values that you believe in? And so I would actually challenge you to think about it in that way, where it's like, okay, you might not have the numbers, but one day you will, and it is your future, and the future of the democracy that we all believe in is dependent upon your participation. And then, I guess to re-emphasize the whole argument here, I really do think there needs to be a cultural revolution around how people think about voting, and those conversations I think happen at a much earlier age than, you know, I think those start in elementary school.
ありがとうございます。そうですね。投票に行くのが待ちきれないっていう、そういうような状況が日本でも生まれてくると、僕はそれはそれで結構革命的な瞬間だなと思うんで、やっぱりそういうことを、僕もそうですし、ここにいる皆さんもそうですし、そういうことに気づいた若い人みんなで変えていって、で数が少ないからこそチャンスだっていうのをどんどん広げていきたいなと思っています。で、ここで僕からのコメントは、終わりにさせていただいて、会場からの質疑応答を受けたいと思います。何点か注意点があるんですけど、質問をされる方は必ず挙手をしてください。で、挙手をしていただいたら僕から当てるのでマイクが届きます。で、マイクに向かって当日通訳も入ってますし、マイクに向かって話をしてください。で、おそらく多くの方が質問されたいと思っています。なので1人1問で申し訳ないですが、1人1問で簡潔に質問を述べてください。では、挙手お願いします。どうしようかな。一番早かった方がですね難しいな。その方です。もう一つ前です。はい、お願いします。
すみません、アマンダさんが、若者に電話をかけて投票に行こうと言われるとおっしゃったんですけれども、その時にですね、俺は投票に行かねえと、お前は誰だと、暴力的で非論理的な人が、たまにはいると思うんですよ。そういった時にどういうふうな諭し方をするのかちょっとお聞きしたいと思いました。
So it depends. I think that young people are generally receptive to hearing from other young people. There's a lot of value in peer-to-peer organizing. So maybe I'm not the best messenger, but maybe like your best friend is, because if your best friend is going to vote and you think your best friend is cool, so then you think that voting is cool, the chances that you go vote because voting is cool increases. So I think that there's a lot of value to having young people call other young people, which is why we do that work. to be totally honest, when we were making those calls, we were, at that point, it was often, it's like, it's not worth the time, you know, it's hard to like engage in a long discussion about why they should go vote, because I could be calling 5 other people and making sure that they did vote. So that's a little bit, that's a late point to have the conversation, but as we engage in programming, the only way to convince somebody to go vote is if they actually understand that they have a stake in the election. And by talking to them about the issues, which is another really important point about young people, is that we are engaged and informed on the issues that matter to us. So if you talk about the issues and help them understand that, you know, when somebody's making a decision about taxes, it's going to affect you. When you bring it down to that level for them, then they have an incentive and they're compelled to vote. So it is, I think, just a matter of kind of reframing the debate so that it seems less, less political and more about, it's more a way for them to like speak up and voice their own opinion and kind of make a decision and share that decision and express that decision about the issue that they care about.
よろしいでしょうか。次、挙手お願いします。どうしようかな。じゃあ一番前にいらっしゃるんで、ここの女性の方。
Hello, thank you for your lecture. I was really interested with your presentation. How your organization lures the younger generation continuously, I mean after the election, because I think the continuous engagement will be effect on the left 51% who didn't register to vote, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually think that the most important email that Rock the Vote sent this past election cycle, and we sent millions of emails, was the one that we sent the morning after the election, where we were able to say we did and recognize the 23 million young people that went out to vote, but then kind of challenge them around this concept that we will, and we will continue to be an important part of our country's democracy and like hold our politicians accountable. And as we now have some time to like decompress after the election and are able to really think about what that engagement looks like, that's what myself and my colleagues are trying to figure out right now, honestly. And we're spending time figuring out like how to connect the young people on certain issues and like funnel them into other campaigns and help them find one another in their local cities and communities and on college campuses so that they can continue to organize in that way. I do like, yeah, I'm really excited because I think that we were able to build a great relationship with the people that we worked with this past cycle through all of the emails and calls and texts that we sent. Now they trust us, and it'll be great to kind of see that relationship continue to develop.
そうですよね。投票日の次の日から全てが始まるっていうのは、まああんまり日本の有権者ない感覚かなと思っていて、投票したら終わりっていうなんかそんな感じがちょっと日本多い気もするんですけど。はい、すみません。次の質問を受けます。どうしよう。難しいですね。これだけ挙げられると。じゃあ次後ろの方でそこの青いはい。
ありがとうございます。日本のようにそのロック・ザ・ボートのような組織やお金があるような団体がない現状で、若者の投票率を上げるために具体的に何ができると思いますか？
I actually think it's more important so Rock the Vote's in a very unique position because we've been doing this work for 23 years and we have a really great brand name and a lot of celebrity friends that can help us do this work. But I actually think it's more important, and why Rock the Vote supports so many of the smaller youth organizations that do the exact same work, but they do it at the community level. And Rock the Vote has an interesting perspective because we are so focused at the national level because we can be. But starting at the community level is so valuable because at the community level and at the local level, you're able to talk about decisions that actually affect your everyday life. And you also, when you organize around those issues and create change, that change can happen overnight. Whereas like if you're talking about something nationally, change might take 2, 3, 4 years before anything gets passed or moved through our government. And so it's really helpful, especially with young people, to organize them around those very local issues. Oftentimes you'll find that young people are more engaged in their communities anyways. Like you probably volunteer with your, with your high school before you would volunteer with some like national group because it means more to you. And so I think that's a really great way of engaging because it's something that they care about, and they're able to kind of translate and see the results of their work much more quickly. And the idea of using issues is really powerful because young people, because they're outside of the system and they don't necessarily fully identify with politicians that are in power right now, it's important to have the issue, like the discussion around, and focus the discussion around the specific issues for them.
そうですね。団体はないこともないんですが、まだロック・ザ・ボートの力を日本で持っている団体がないので、そこは僕らもそうですし、共催のドット JP さんもそうですし、いろんな力で盛り上げていければいいなと思ってます。次の質問いきます。どうしようかな。まだあっちの島行ってないんで、どうしようかな。じゃあそこの紫青の女性の方お願いします。
ありがとうございます。パブリックリレーションズの会社で働いているので、日々人の態度を変えるっていうのがどれだけ難しいかっていうことを日々業務で感じてるんですけど、質問なんですが、さっきアマンダさんがエデュケーションから Find the Voices というその若者がその教育ボーティングに関する教育を得て、でそれで内なる声といいますか、そういうのを見つけるっていうような説明をされてたんですけども、もう少しそこのプロセスとか具体的な例とかがあればお聞かせ願いたいなと思いました。
Definitely. So the kind of nuts and bolts of our education work is focused on like an election center where every state has different rules, and oftentimes they're completely arbitrary and were made up by some really old man who they're from like the 1700s and don't make any sense, so it's hard for a young person to understand them. So we provide a resource where you can get your state-specific information. We will put out voter guides, so we will share information about both candidates on specific issues. And we do that because young people, it's really hard for young people to find unbiased information about the candidates, and we serve that role. We will, send reminders about deadlines or election day, or like this is where you go to find out where you need to go vote, things like that. We will share all of that information. But then an important part of the work that we do, and which we'll actually start to focus on more now that the election is behind us, is our work in high schools. So we created a civics education curriculum called Democracy Class, which is a 45-minute lesson plan that any teacher in the country can sign up to get for free. And we will ship them off a kit with a lesson plan that walks students through the voting process, a conversation about local issues, and a mock election. And then at the end of the class, we ask every student to register and also take a pledge to vote in the next election. We also will ask them to volunteer with Rock the Vote so that we can continue to do good work in these communities. But we are working with teachers to get this program into more and more high schools, because one of the I call it a crisis actually, is that civics education has been defunded in the public school system systematically over the course of the last 30 years. Obviously, we're all in tough economic times, and for the schools, civics education is often the first thing for them to cut. And so it's been really important for us to kind of fill that void and go into these high school classrooms and honestly just start the conversation earlier. I wish that Rock the Vote could do even more and, you know, talk to 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds so that we could, you know, create this kind of cultural revolution around voting. We're, you know, kind of limited in terms of capacity and resources in that regard, but we do spend a lot of time in high school classrooms, and I will go and I'll, you know, sometimes bring a local DJ with me or a local athlete, or sometimes we'll have a celebrity star join us to help kind of engage the students a little bit more. But I can tell you, I've been really surprised by the level of engagement that these young people have. Like, they are so hungry for the opportunity to participate that, and it's completely contrary to everything that you read and everything that, you know, the older generation wants to say about young people, that like we don't care. When you go into the classroom, you find the exact opposite. These kids are so excited, and it's a really rewarding experience.
先ほど控室でもちょっとその学校に入るのってどうなんだ、日本で学校に入るのがすごく難しいんだっていう話をしたら、いやアメリカだって難しいんだと、長年やってきたからだって言われて、はいすいませんみたいな感じになったんで、頑張らなきゃいけないなと思うんですけど、次の質問を受けたいなと思います。どうしようか。じゃあそちらの方いきますか。
ありがとうございます。すごく有名人を起用されたりしてすごくお金がある団体なのかなと思ったんですけど、お金をどういうふうに集めて強い運動をしていたのかすごく興味があります。
Yeah. I wish we had more money. Surprisingly, we are a very small organization. There are only 8 staff members. So we really do rely on like our volunteer network, and that's why our celebrities are so great. But even so, first, I guess to answer like straight money question, a third of our budget comes from foundations. Another third comes from corporations who help us put on big events. So, for example, Pringles sponsored one of our convention concerts, and they, you know, foot the $50,000 bill, for example, of the venue and the talent. And then we have a third that come in from individual donations. So just, you know, the individual out there that really believes in the importance of young people voting. But when we work with celebrities, the beauty of it is that a lot of them actually want to work with us, because a lot of them want to, they realize that they have a lot of power with their audience, and they, you know, as an individual are engaged in the political process, and so will play some role in terms of getting their audience engaged. And the beauty of technology and social media is that it's easy to ask a celebrity to send out a tweet, and that tweet could reach 5 million people. And, you know, we don't have to pay $10,000 to have them wear a Rock the Vote t-shirt when they're only going to get seen wearing the t-shirt by, you know, I don't know, 50,000 people. So there's actually minimal cost to like reaching more people through technology, which is one of the important strategies that we use when working with the artists. We'll ask them to do things through social media or our tools and technology first before we will, like we put on concerts every now and then, but we engage more of our artists through technology. I think money, you know, it's always a struggle, but as I was saying to these guys earlier, like if there's a will, there's a way. And one of the great things about young people everywhere is that we are the most kind of audacious and bold and enthused and like excited people, and we are resourceful. So if we want to make something happen, we can.
なのでこの話を今聞いて日本のプリングルス支社みたいなのないんですかねと思って、そういうのがあれば明日にでも営業に行こうかなと思ったんですけど、ツイッターからの質問も何個か拾いたいんで、この後1個会場から取ってその後1個ツイッターを挟ませてもらって、その後もう一回会場から1人か2人ぐらいですかねはいけると思いますんで、お願いします。じゃあ最初から手を挙げられてるんでこちらの方、一番前の方お願いしていいですか。
Hi, I'm Ishiro Koshi. First of all, I would have voted if Snoop Dogg was on part of your campaign. Really. Thanks for coming over all the way from the States. I really appreciate, and I feel so honored to have you here. My question is really simple. Is there anything that you could have done, should have done, or is there anything that you're gonna keep motivated young people? Because you got Facebook, Twitter, YouTube channel, you got all packages. It looks like you got all of it.
Yeah.
But still, there's like 50% of young
Yeah.
people didn't bought it. So is there anything you could have done?
No, I think there are a lot of lessons learned from this past cycle. It's also like how we spend our money and when we chose to do different programming and things like that. So there are definitely those kind of tangible aspects, but I think the greatest lesson learned was actually on election day. We had thousands of young people call our office and say, I couldn't vote because I wasn't registered, or I didn't have the right ID, or like somebody told me that I wasn't allowed to vote and they sent me away. And that's where our thinking around this like education crisis has kind of been prioritized, because there's just so much that we can do to teach. We just need to teach more young people about how the process works. And I look forward to this coming year and like the next 2 years where there's like there's no presidential election to divert our attention and focus. But we will be spending a lot of time on this idea that if you focus on education with young people, you'll see the numbers kind of flip-flop. I also think that obviously the situation is different in America, where the numbers are kind of in our favor and we are an undeniable part of the population. And I think that as young people, so like we have that, but even anywhere as young people, like I think as soon as we kind of realize our power and the role that we play, we'll just like kind of blow everyone out of the water, and they don't stand a chance in terms of like what we're able to do. And once we realize that as a group, as a generation, as a body, like that's really, really exciting. Yeah, but we're always learning. Actually, that's a good example of like how through the last 20 years our program has changed. So literally, if you look at Rock the Vote stuff from the like 1996 election when Bill Clinton was like those elections, we were promoting a fax number. Like we have come a long way, and so I think it's a function of working with young people, because obviously we're changing all the time, and you have to constantly evolve as an organization to make sure that you're able to talk and reach out to young people in an effective way.
じゃあここでツイッターからの質問を一つ、取りたいと思います。先ほどアマンダさんが110万人の若者に有権者登録をした多くの若者に対して情報をどんどん選挙に関する情報を送ってるっていう話があったと思うんですけども、実際どういう情報を送っているんだっていうような質問が来ているので、それを教えていただいてもいいですか。
So we send very friendly reminders to go vote, and we send them often. So every person that's come in through our programming will certainly get an email about, election day is tomorrow. Here is a link to your polling location. Here is a link to your ballot. Again, we will never we'll never say go vote for this candidate. But we instead are trying to provide them with the information that they need and the resources that they need to cast an informed ballot on their own. So we do that through, emails. We will text them as well, and because we have the registration hurdle, a lot of our communications are actually around that. So we'll remind people that their state's registration deadline is coming up, and we'll say the furthest we would go is like, hey, the deadline's coming up. If you are not registered to vote, here's a link to do so. And then make sure that 5, 10, 20 of your friends are registered too. That's kind of the extent of our campaigning, but we certainly will never support one candidate over the other. Our goal is to simply make sure that the person has the information they need to cast the ballot that they want, and they know where to go and when to go and how to do it.
ありがとうございます。じゃあまた会場からあとごめんなさい、時間なんであと2人か3人になると思うんですけど、どうしようかな。じゃあ真ん中のグループの一番後ろの方で手を挙げられてる方いきますか。はい、お願いします。
Hello, I'm a high school student, and from my point of view, my friends will know when the vote is taking place, but don't know what the vote is about. And well, I think that's because they don't have the opportunity to learn about voting, why vote is important at school. What do you think we must do or must be done continuously at school?
Yeah, that's where I think the conversation around issues really matters, because young people, like, they know in their community if the example that we always use when I'm like in our office is that the number one issue that we get from young people when we go to the classrooms is they complain about why their trash is not picked up more regularly. And that's very local and a very like specific issue, but they realize that that is something that like somebody else is deciding and somebody else is in power and making the decision about how often their trash gets picked up and how like the neighborhood next door might get their trash picked up more frequently, for example. And so they realize these things, and I think that's young people, like we know what's happening, we're engaged. I'm sure that your friends, they might not go vote because they don't know what the issues are, but I guarantee you the issues are the same things that you guys are talking about in your conversations anyways. Like when you go, when you have to pay a tax on something, like you'll probably complain about that tax to your friends. And so then you translate and connect that to the fact that like the government is making those decisions, there's a lot of power and value to connecting the dots there. But again, it's kind of just the most important and the most like revolutionary thing here is that we just need to change the culture around voting and participation so that young people take the time to do their homework and learn about what the candidates are talking about and know, where the candidates stand on different issues, and that's a part of being like an active and engaged citizen in your country.
すごいですね。高校生がいらっしゃったとはちょっと嬉しくなってきたんですが、また誰か、質問を受けたいと思います。どうしようかな。じゃあそこの、真ん中のベスト着てる。はい。でこの後ごめんなさい、もう1問ぐらいツイッターからいただこうと思うので、中継を見ている方もツイッターにぜひ書き込んでください。
ありがとうございます。アマンダさんの目から見て日本は今社会はどう映っているのかちょっと聞きたいんですけども、アメリカは歴史的に見ても自由や革新的なこととか新しいことを常に求めているような気がするんですよ。でさっきの We Will の動画を見ている通り、その中でも人種とか、ジェンダーとかがさまざまに織り込まれている動画を見て、でもそれで一方日本はちょっと今リスクを取ることを恐れているっていうなんか社会全体の気質があると思うんですよ。ちょっとごめんなさい、首相とかがくだらない間違いを犯したところで社会的にもちょっと潰されてしまったりとかもあると思うんですけども、そこで、 アマンダさんは今日本はどう思ってどういうふうに見えるかなと思う。いいですか？
That's a tough question. I think there's a lot of opportunity and potential. I think that the fact that I've had this opportunity to go and talk to young people throughout the country, I realize that there might be this like standard that people are afraid to take risks and they're afraid to, and like they don't speak up and they don't engage in that way. But I think the reality is that that's not exactly true. And you see that with young people everywhere in the country. And that's kind of the opportunity that you have as young people to infiltrate the system and change it. And I actually am I didn't like come to Japan with any kind of like preconceived notions, but I'm definitely leaving with a lot of hope and like optimism about what you young people are able to do here, because I've met with students here in Tokyo, I've met with students in Okinawa and Fukuoka and Osaka, and it's just been really, really great to have these dialogues with young people talking about like how to make the system more accessible. And I was in a session in Fukuoka where we had these breakouts and the students themselves like brainstorm strategies for youth engagement here. And they were talking about things like online voting and like voting by email and all these kind of like really like liberal and progressive ideas about changing the system. And that to me is just like a great example of how awesome and how much opportunity there is here to make change and really just make the system work for you guys, because you're the future. So I'm excited for you. Short answer.
大丈夫でしょうか？じゃあ、あと、会場から1問とツイッターから1問にしたいと思うので、会場すみません、ラストになりますが、どうしてもっていう人がいっぱいいますね。どうしようかな。じゃあごめんなさい、あと2問にします。時間大丈夫なのかちょっと分かんないですけど、あと2問。じゃあそちらの、女性の方かな。はい。わかりました。ごめんなさい、ラストの質問のそうです。この後ツイッターから1問で終わりになります。申し訳ありません。
興味深い、ディスカッションありがとうございます。私自身大学生時代にスピーチ活動をしておりました。で、言葉の力、人に言葉を通して自分の思いを伝えるということの重要性には気づきましたが、同時に文化やアートにも私自身とても興味を持っています。アマンダさんはアートやカルチャーが世界を国を変えるポジティブなパワーがあると思いますか？ Okay, I speak in English.
Absolutely. I think that that's the only way to change it, really. That's why Rock the Vote uses arts and music and pop culture to make politics relevant, because it's a way that you can actually relate to young people. And I think yeah, definitely, that is the way to, once you have a young person, the way to actually help them understand the importance of politics is by relating to them in a way that they like, using artists that they respect, and using art, like just like images and things like that, to convey a message of civic participation and the importance of civic participation is a really, really powerful tool. And we've been using that exact strategy for 23 years, and we've registered more than 6 million people, and we've built a community of 10 million, millions of people that are engaged and voting and engaging on our country's democracy because they were introduced through arts and music and those kind of cultural things.
Yeah, I believe the power of words, of speech, but at the same time, I believe the power of culture and art, and that sometimes connect between culture and between countries and countries around the world for peace.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's, I think, one of like the beauties of young people everywhere is that we realize that. And so like not only are we organizing in our own countries, but like there really is kind of this global movement happening of young people like taking over the world and changing it and creating the like fair and free and like just and respectful world that we all really want to see happen.
Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
ありがとうございます。最後に一問ツイッターから英語で来ているのでちょっと読み上げますね。勝谷古池さんから。How the party organize supporters online community where Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, who becomes the community manager? あれ、僕の英語で通じたかどうか怪しいんですけど、大丈夫ですか ？Thank you.
Yeah. Who is? Oh, for Rock the Vote.
So, no, how the party organize? How the party organize supporters online community? Do you know?
No.
Not Rock.
Oh. I'm not really sure what this question is asking, but so, well, we use, I guess, so basically we use Twitter and Facebook and other things through social media to kind of help young people get organized and find ways to like find one another, and then once they find one another, we're able to cast messages to a very broad networks. Our personal like social media system is managed by 2 staff on our team who kind of put forth all this message and maintain all the communities, and like we think about it really as like building a relationship with people. So we don't we're like the friend that talks about voting and encourages people to vote. That's what we like to think about ourselves, and we're able to kind of build that relationship with people through social media. I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but social media is a really powerful tool, but I guess one point on that is that like technology alone is never actually going to be the difference. You still have to promote it. You still have to find ways to get it in front of people, and that's where there is a lot of skill. That's where the skill and kind of the work comes into making sure that you're using technology in a way that it's actually helpful and beneficial and supports the cause that you're trying to advance.
ありがとうございます。ちょっとごめんなさい。僕の英語があまりにも悪かったですが、残念ながら時間となったので、皆さん質疑がいろいろあると思うんですが、ここで、質疑応答は、終わりとさせていただきます。で、本当にアマンダさん今日は長い間、しかも日本に来て最後の日5日目ということでありがとうございました。やっぱり僕も日本の若者の一人としてロック・ザ・ボートに負けないような組織としてではなくて若者一人一人として日本をもっと盛り上げるためにもっともっとやっていこうという決意をしたいい日になったので僕にとってもすごく楽しい日でした。もう一度アマンダさんに盛大な拍手をお願いします。